Two persons found guilty of practicing gay in the Republic of Cameroon sentenced to 5 years imprisonment and a fine of 200,000 francs CFA levied on them by the Court of First Instance here in Cameroon's economic capital Douala. The verdict was handed down today. Greater details in this edition of the 6 p.m. newscast on Équinoxe Television concerning the two homosexuals who have been sentenced to 5 years imprisonment. And in other news, he had been using the name of the Director of Cabinet at the Presidency of the Republic, Samuel Vondo Ayolo, the Director of the Civil Cabinet, to dupe citizens. He is an inmate of the Kondengi Maximum Security Prison in Yaoundé. He is now in the dragnets of security and defense forces and out of the country. The question is France, the evil hand behind the turbulent situation in the Central African Republic is now rising to the sky after the arrest of a French national with a huge amount of weapons and ammunition. Thank you for joining us on this edition of the 6 p.m. primetime newscast on Équinoxe Television, live from our headquarters in Cameroon's economic capital Douala. I am Bable Jonathan. We begin right away in Bafang in the west region of the country, where panic gripped inhabitants and students when a team of vaccination against polio entered the school, and some false information circulated and provoked chaos and commotion in that school. Details with Immaculate Fogwe.
Panic grips the parents of pupils studying at Government Primary Practicing School Bafang in the Haut-Kam Division West region. The angry parents stormed the school premises after getting rumors that their children were being administered the COVID-19 vaccine. The parents, who were in a mad rush to take their children back home, were denied access into the school campus by security forces. Few minutes later, they were able to force themselves inside. This child, who is currently receiving treatment at the Bafang hospital, got himself seriously injured as he tried escaping following the news that health personnel were on campus to vaccinate them against the coronavirus. Recently, we heard rumors that a child, after being administered the polio vaccine, died. So I hurried up to get my child. I know it is rumors, but it is better I take my child home for now. We were informed that they wanted to vaccinate our children, so I came to collect my daughter. The vaccination agents equally give their own version of the story. While on campus, we informed the headmistress that we wanted to vaccinate the children, and she told us that now is not the perfect time for the children to get themselves vaccinated. So while I and my colleagues were leaving, we saw a teacher descending with a child who had been injured. No child was vaccinated. According to Baba Batari, First Deputy Senior Divisional Officer for the Haut-Kam Division, the vaccination agents were rather administering the polio vaccine and vitamin A. He urges the population of Haut-Kam to refrain from the propagation of fake news.
School Bafang in the west region of the country after that incident provoked by false information saying that children were being vaccinated against coronavirus. It should be noted that as of now, as far as coronavirus vaccination is concerned, only adults. Children are vaccinated for poliomyelitis, who are against poliomyelitis. That is the vaccination that is going on in the different parts of the country. Now we continue talking about children. This time, children with special needs who are facing several challenges because of lack of adequate consideration in society and in their schools. The Rejato reports on Boya.
Their health condition kept them in this state, and it is not any fault of theirs, but the society keep reminding them that they don't belong here.
The first thing I would say is that there is this lack of acceptance by the society, accepting children with special needs or persons with special needs. We don't view them as human beings as we are. We feel that they are a product of curses, they are a product of spiritual attacks and demonic attacks.
And in Cameroon, rejection is a price the people, especially children with special needs, are paying for something they can't explain. But St. Rita's Foundation in Buea Subdivision is bent on changing this notion, and its doors are open for children with special needs.
Okay, here you find children who have a Down syndrome. Down syndrome is a disease that affects the child's mental ability. We have children with autism. Some of them are aggressive, some of them are mild. We have children with cerebral palsy.
These children have diverse disabilities. There are those who are coming with autism spectrum disorder, attention deficit, hyperactivity disorder, visual impairment, hearing impairment, just to name a few.
And the education received here are mostly vocational.
We thought it wise to bring a vocational training program where we train these children, give them different skills so that they can get back to the society and become self-employed.
The management of St. Rita's is also calling on parents not to violate the right to education of their children.
Most parents are not accepting the fact that their children have disabilities.
And in these fans, these children with special needs are being groomed on how to get out there and provide the societal need.
I'm doing needlework, I'm doing bead work, I'm doing shoe work, and they'll give me money. I'll use the money to pay my school fees and help my parents.
I can knit dresses.
And today, these physically challenged Cameroonians say they are not only dreaming, but are already realizing their dreams. The program today is one of the training sessions to showcase how these children are being empowered for a better society, their society.
And in the report coming up, Equinoxe takes a look at the falling standards of the English language in the Republic of Cameroon in terms of speaking, writing, and understanding. English language, it says, has suffered a significant drop in standards, especially among young people. Details in this report.
Students nowadays no longer write or speak standard English. Educationists say they discover this when marking examination scripts and listen to the learners express themselves.
We come across these things during the marking of GC examinations, where students use certain forms like 2, like 4, which means 4. They write 4, 2, they write 2, they write 2. This makes them lose sense.
He reveals what he thinks could be the root causes.
Through television, through computer, through the internet, students have come to understand so many things, and this has helped to weaken them in the field of writing. Creative writing is no longer existing as it used to be in those days.
This is not the case, according to some of the students who talk of addiction to a method of writing called shorthand.
Instead of writing long form, you have to shorten it and write abbreviation. It's true that sometimes we want to write, for example, you are writing an exam, they ask you a question, and since you're in the house, there's less time, you want to write short form for you to complete your paper. It's now our generation, so we are youth and we want to use the same style that we copy from artists.
Most of us copy those things from these stars, comedians, musicians. It's very bad.
This student testifies how it affected her mock examination results.
I, for one, the thing has affected me because even during when I was writing the ordinary level mock, I made a mistake and it was like I failed the paper because of that.
Poorly spoken or written English or French by some of these students, according to a writer, Jupiter Ebonge, also stems from parents who do not master the languages and also from certain careless teachers.
You know that children is learning from adults. When he's listening what adults say, we want to copy it. Many teachers don't have enough time to care of any individual students.
To get out of this risky train heading towards official examination period, learners must adhere to this advice.
They should be studious enough. They should do a lot of writing and maybe meet their teachers to give them a helping hand. A student can write an essay, a student can write a poem, a student can, that is creative writing. They should involve themselves in these things. And we advise them to write, to do their assignments, so that through marking we have discussions with them and we correct.
The ball is now rolling in the court of the concerned students.
Educational stakeholders in the littoral region of the Republic of Cameroon say the coronavirus pandemic has far-reaching adverse consequences on the teaching and learning process. They were meeting today here in Douala to evaluate how far they have gone so far for the current academic year, and they were also discussing strategies to improve on the teaching and learning process for better results. Charles Ekome reports.
The COVID-19 pandemic is said to have been one of the major problems which contributed to the hindrance of a smooth 2020-2021 academic year for the basic education sector in the littoral region. This was disclosed by the regional delegate of basic education for the region, Leopold Yinga Njamen, who chaired the presentation of the balance sheet for the year by his subordinates.
We had many problems such as this COVID we are faced. Anyway, the Ministry of Basic Education gives to us what we call police sanity and protocol anti-COVID. We use only this document to fight against this COVID.
During the presentation, a series of problems were also stated by Mbiba Chrisa-Claire, Regional Inspector for Pedagogy in the Littoral Region, in charge of primary education.
We cannot carry out this activity effectively because we have encountered some difficulties. And some of the difficulties are the enclavement of, you have the enclavement of some areas. There are some areas that to access is very difficult. But we also encountered some difficulties in classrooms where we realize that the new curricula is not effectively being implemented, and we suggest that teachers should be trained on that.
The futuristic perspectives for the ongoing 2020-2021 academic year will be done in two phases in regards to the management of resources allocated for these projects in the region. The first phase consists of the use of resources for the development of primary schools, and the second phase will consist of the use of resources for the development of basic education departmental offices in the littoral region. In total, there are 81 projects listed with the sum of 616 million francs CFA to accompany the fruition of these projects.
Two homosexuals have been sentenced to 5 years in jail by the Bonanjo Court of First Instance. Njekam Loic Midrel alias Shakiro and Mute Roland alias Patricia have been sentenced to 5 years imprisonment and slammed a fine of 200,000 francs CFA each by the court. And of course, the verdict was handed down earlier today, and if they don't pay this financial obligation, they will be constrained to serve another 12 months imprisonment term, and they were prosecuted for attempted homosexuality, public indecency, and non-possession of national identity cards. We'll be bringing to you greater details in our subsequent news editions. Now, let's talk about this inmate who has been using the name of the director of the civil cabinet at the presidency of the Republic, Samuel Vondo Ayolo, to dupe citizens. And he is an inmate in the Yaoundé Central Prison, notably the Kondengi Maximum Security Prison in the nation's political capital, Yaoundé. He has been arrested and is now in detention. Smanjikan Gabriel reports.
Calvin Eyafa is the unfortunate man to have fallen into the dragnet of security elements in Yaoundé. The man, though disabled and held behind bars since the 8th of July 2019 at the Central Prison in Kondengi, has been faking his identity to be the chief of cabinet at the presidency of the Republic. He got in contact with the Nigerian president, but in the course of their chat, it went off as the president of Niger called back to check. It's from there we realized that something was wrong. Jean-Calvin Eyafa started his activities after getting into contact with the ambassador of Niger in France via Google. He went on Google, where he got the number of the Niger ambassador in France and presented himself like the chief of cabinet at the presidency of the Republic. But he wanted to talk with his Niger counterpart, saying that the Cameroonian president wanted to talk with his Niger counterpart. After an investigation carried out by police officers, the said number was tracked at the Kondengi Central Prison. After we tracked the number, we discovered that it was from the Central Prison that the calls have been made. There we caught Mr. Eyafa. The victim, after a lengthy chat with the security officers, accepted the different complaints against him. The victim has not only called the Nigerian president, but also Malian president, World Bank, the United Nations, Nairobi, and several non-governmental organizations. In one of the calls he made to a non-governmental organization based in Nairobi, Kenya, he gained 1,385,954 francs. He is expected to appear before the State Council in the days ahead.
In a similar story, in the Central African Republic, a French national has been arrested with a huge amount of weapons and ammunitions. Police sources say the ammunitions and weapons were discovered in his home. Details in this report by Immaculate Fogwe.
After the police discovered a large arsenal of weapons in his home, French national Jean-Remy Quignolot was arrested. He is believed to be a mercenary. Local news sources revealed that he had lived in the capital of the Central African Republic, Bangui, for several years. Police reports say Quignolot once trained fighters of the former Silica coalition, but now he presents himself as a consultant journalist in Bangui. According to humanitarian sources, the man had worked as a bodyguard for civil organizations in the Central African Republic, a country fighting a major armed rebellion seeking to overthrow the government. The Russian National Security Advisor to President Faustin Touadéra, Valery Zakharov, said on Twitter that the man had been detained with huge amounts of weapons and ammunitions. Russia has deployed hundreds of paramilitaries from private security companies to the Central African Republic to support government forces. Although Faustin Touadéra won the December 2020 election, opposition parties rejected the results. Rebel groups took control of several towns in the north and west and reached the outskirts of the capital Bangui in January 2021. With the help of Russian and Rwandan forces, government troops drove back the rebels and brought back many of the towns under state control. more than 276,000 people have been displaced in the country since mid-December last year. The United Nations estimates that about 1.8 million people are in need of urgent help.
Talking Point is up next. Adrien Ibako Bisson, political analyst, is our guest today. You're welcome.
Thank you very much for this opportunity again. And I want to send all special greetings to all Cameroonians who are watching this program now. Thank you.
Right. The question today is, who is masterminding security, socio-political tensions in many African nations today? What is the evil hand? Who is masterminding all these troubles in African countries today? In the Central African Republic, being one of the countries struggling to contain a rebellion, a French national is arrested with guns and other munitions.
Well, what I would say here is that the situation right now we are facing in Chad is equally as we have with the same situations we are facing in so many other African countries, where it has gotten to a point where the analysis that we can make in Nigeria or what we see happening in Nigeria today can be used as an analysis of what is happening in Chad, in Central Africa, in Cameroon, in Somalia, in Ethiopia, in Niger, in Burkina Faso, in Ivory Coast. They are all the same story. That means that Africa is facing a very common problem, and which is very pertinent for us to understand that this is not a very special problem which is happening only in Chad. We also see that in so many countries that I cannot cite all, the similar things are happening. The question here is, what is the challenge? You see, it depends on who is looking at Africa, and it depends on who is answering the question of what is really wrong in Africa today, the insecurity and the munitions that we find today in the African soil. And we understand that we don't have factories that produce weapons. All these weapons definitely are coming from the West.
Except for locally made
weapons, but these are not the ones we are seeing in the hands of the rebel, especially the ones we saw in Nigeria.
Even here in Cameroon,
and so many other places, whether it's Mali, whether it's in Central Africa, like I've cited, you realize that those people carrying those weapons do not have the resources to afford those weapons. If you look at what happens also in Nigeria, they don't have the resources to afford the kinds of weapons you find them using. So that simply tells you that we have a foreign investor having interest to destabilize a country for its own interest. You are talking today in Chad, we are hearing the Russians going there. What are they doing there? They only probably are going to secure their own interests, like they did in Central Africa, in Mali, and so many other places. So you come to realize that we are dealing here with very vicious and ambitious Western counterparts who have only seen a means to continue building, how will I call it, an economy of legacy from the African exploitation. And this is what we are still seeing happening as in reference to Chad.
In Chad, the French military has been there, the French soldiers have been there, they have a military base there, and in the Central African Republic they had been there also before the coming of the Russians. And today a French national who is identified as a former French soldier, somebody who had trained former Seleka rebels, who was served as bodyguard for several organizations in the Central African Republic, who has been living in the country's capital, Bangui, for several years, and today he is arrested with a huge amount of weapons and ammunition. What can we read within the lines of that?
Chad is living under occupation of France, and not only Chad alone. Like I've said, these problems are not a special problem to one particular country. This is what we find all over Africa. So you see the presence of France in Chad is not for the interest of the Chadians. They are there to secure their interest, because Chad being the 10th largest oil reserve in Africa, and also the power-based source where France gets its energy from. So they are there to protect their interests, and they are protecting their interests at the expense of the population. And this they are doing on both sides. They are using the government and they are using the rebels, because at the end of the day, when you have the locals fighting against each other, it becomes easy for the vulture to have easy meat where he does not stress, and that is exactly what you find happening today in Chad. And that is why I'm saying that I'm giving these suggestions, that these are dictators and these are open dictations coming from the West by democracy, because you cannot, I always say that democracy would have been good for civilized and sound-minded and healthy human beings. You cannot allow democracy to be practiced in a country like Chad that does not own its economy, that does not own its politics, that does not have its own education, that does not have a good health sector. Basically, Chad depends 100% on France. And how do you tell me that you expect the lives of the Chadians to improve when you have leaders that are put in place and not elected by the people from that country, are being appointed by colonialists? And to be like we saw in the other I think it was if I'm not mistaken, it was a speech that Idriss Déby made, that he was forced by France to go in for another term. He came out on international television and he made that announcement. So this is just to tell you that we have people who feels that they can decide what happens in a country that has a population of 15 million people, Chadians, without consulting the Chadians of what their opinion is concerning the presence of France in their country. The Chadians are left away from all this due process and from all these decisions. The people sit behind and take these decisions without the consent and the consensus of the population of that country. So this is the actual problem we are facing, not only in Chad, but we are facing in all these other African countries as I'm describing. So these ammunitions are there. It will shock a lot of Africans that if you go at the level of the IMF and you want to ask the foreign reserves of many of these Western nations, basically they don't have natural resources. Africa is putting down hardcore raw materials as its own foreign exchange reserves at the level of France. You go in many of these Western nations, their reserve, their foreign exchange reserves is weapons. That is what they use as their own foreign exchange reserves are weapons.
In the Central African Republic, what the other questions that are rising after this arrest is, how did he get into the country with all those guns, with all the ammunitions? How did he come through some diplomatic channels? Did he come through some illegal means that were not checked, or he has accomplices within the national territory?
Well, how he came in, I think it should be very obvious, because this is only happening at the time that Idriss Déby has fallen. That's why we are getting...
in Central African Republic.
Pardon?
I'm talking about the situation in Central African Republic.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. That I understand you very well. That's what, because if you remember, one of the major roles Idriss at that time was playing in that area, keeping security there. Now, if you look at what is you are asking the question of how did he enter, the question here is who is in control and who is making the rules in that country. It's not the incumbent government, but it is France. So these are the strategies of, how will I put it, giving mediums for people to come in with ammunition to destabilize. What was he using the weapons for? He was using these weapons to supply rebels. It was not to give to the government. It was not to fortify the government. This is to sponsor rebel groups to rise up against the government. Because if you don't destabilize and keep the people under fear, you cannot tend to rule the people, and you cannot. It gives the people the opportunity for them to start calling on the West to come. We are seeing what is happening today in Nigeria. Buhari is calling for the United States to come and help him quell down the insecurity in his country. So these are the things that I'm saying, that until the Chadians, the Cameroonians, the Africans in general, permit me to say this before I go ahead to say what I wanted to say. You see, when France looks at Central Africa, it doesn't look at Central Africa as a nation belonging to the people of that origin. France sees it as a colony which must pay taxes to its country, and
even though it's no longer a colony.
Pardon?
It is not a colony. It is not a conquered territory. Neither is it even a trusteeship territory. It is a nation.
Yeah, that is the impression that a lot of Africans do have. It is not. I'm sorry to say that, but if you look at all the 14 French colonies in Africa that are paying $500 billion every year as colonial tax to the French government, for what and why? They are paying the debts which France in the time of the war spent, and now is recovering it back from Africa. Apart from that, all its investments are all in Africa. So all I'm saying here is that is the way France looks at Central Africa. The people of that nation sees it as their nation, but I see it as Africa, and that is why the problems that are happening there, I want to pan-Africanize it and look at it as an African problem, and we need to look at it from that perspective, because if we start wanting to handle these problems as individual nations, trust you me, it's very impossible. Chadians, even if they come together, or the Central Africa, even if they come together, they cannot, I repeat, remove the intervention of France. Permit me to explain this to probably
yes, go ahead.
Yes, if I mean to the advantages of the people who are watching right now. You see, this super world power has given us the impression that democracy is the only way to fast accelerate a community, give people their full rights, and allow development to take place under a serene atmosphere. But it's not true. They made us to understand that power is rotational, which is also in contradiction to what they practice at the level of the Commonwealth. They have made us to understand that power is hereditary. You cannot tell me that you have 5 permanent members that decide what happens around the world. Over how many billion citizens of the world, we have 5 nations that determines their future and their destiny. And these are the individuals that feels that they have the say and they have the decision on what happens in Africa. This is not democracy. This is an abuse of democracy, and this is an abuse of human rights, because the rights of the people of that country have not been given, and they are abusing and taking advantages of the people because of the insecurity, which they are the ones creating this insecurity. If you look, for example, way back in their independence, you cannot tell me that a person is given independence when the person does not have rights to control his own economy. That's not independence. That is not independent. It's just like giving a businessman giving a businessman a business with no capital, and you say the man is running a business. What does he use in running or building that business? So these are some of the things that we need to be very tactful to understand, that if one nation in Africa rises up today, it cannot defeat these people. And that was the essence of the meeting in Berlin 1884, presided by the United Nations, to perpetually, at the time when the League of Nations in 1923 to 1945, when the United Nations was created, was at the point when they had already agreed at the level of the West to perpetually use Africa in building a lifetime legacy and keeping their race at the top. And that's what we talk about white supremacy. So these are the things that we are saying, that if Africa or Chad or Central Africa or Cameroon or Niger, Burkina Faso, Ethiopia, we need to come together as one nation in order to defeat these people. Because if you go in as an individual, you saw what happened in Ghana when Macron went to Ghana to go and discuss about loans and aid to Nana Addo. Everyone saw how Nana Addo conducted a deliverance on Macron. Macron was very embarrassed. As a matter of fact, he has never had that kind of encounter in any African head of state.
So when you look at this example that you're just citing, why do you think that a nation like the Central African Republic, like Chad, like Niger, cannot rise up and say no to this foreign influence, no to this foreign manipulation, and put an end to it?
It is true that the power lies in the hands of the people, and that's the question you have asked has a lot of things to make the Africans understand how is it possible. You see, I was giving some analysis. Permit me to explain this very well, because like I said, you can use an analysis in Nigeria and explain what is happening in Central Africa. That country is a population of 5 million persons in Central Africa. Chad is 15 million. Cameroon is 26 million. A population of 5 million with heavily rich natural resources. Yet the people live in abject poverty. How do you explain that a nation that is as rich as Chad, Central Africa, Cameroon, keep naming them, yet 85% of its population lives in abject poverty? That is why we have the mass rate of migration. These things are done intentionally by the colonialists. So if these Chadians rise up today, it's easy to quell them down, because when you keep people in a very a long period in a very particular state of poverty and hardship, durex, it's easy to buy their consciences. Tell me how in a country like Central Africa we have a government that is in place, does not reflect the people, and yet the government still wins every election that the people go into. That's why you have the rise up in all the conflicts right now in Central Africa. Coming to Chad, the same thing since 1990. Tell me how a man who did not enter power through election, through ballot box, and then gives his citizens the impression that it is only through democracy that the people, the majority, can determine their leader they want. I will tell you that democracy is like currency. You need to be able to define what context of democracy are we talking about. If we are talking about Western democracy, let me be honest to all Africans. Western democracy is a minority that rules the majority. We don't have a currency, we don't have democracy, we don't have politics, we don't have economy, we don't have health. So Africa has not yet been able to build its own system, its own legacy that can outlive its own leaders. So when we talk about this democracy here, it does not work for the African people. All these electoral processes, they don't work for the African people. Since in the 60s, we are talking almost about 60 years today, Africans are not able to remove a colonial diaper that the master put on him. Africans are still running down the same road of democracy. We can run down this road for 200 years, we will not get any solution.
And in that perspective, others think that Africans should stop the blame game, blaming Western nations. Yes, it may be true that they are the ones manipulating, sending in the guns, and orchestrating all the destruction, all the insecurity in the African nations. But what about the leaders? What about the leaders who are permitting some of these things to happen, who are getting into agreements for some of these things, opening the way for some of these things to occur?
I'm making this, the question you have said, there are many analyses I've made on it. There are three chains of responsibility, of areas of blame, and how will I put it, people who have assumed responsibility. At the level of the Commonwealth, the Western nation, they have a responsibility over Africa. For example, you come to our leaders, they have an area of responsibility, and then you come to the people, the population of that country, they do also have a responsibility. So when you have your hope on a certain leader and that leader fails you, the next responsibility becomes yourself. So that's why I'm saying that the 850 million population of African youths, when this population would have been enlightened and understand the Western exploitation and the white supremacy over Africa and colonization, civilization, and extermination of the black race, when this population will come to that realization, we will be able to build a united front. It is difficult to take an unenlightened people in front of an election, because how will I call it, the ignorance of one voter can hamper the future of a nation. So it is very important that what we go over the social media, the media, to do is to enlighten the youths in Africa and our leaders, because many of these leaders do not understand what they are doing. You cannot allow the enemies of the West exploit your own country. That means that you exercise your own tyranny over those that are beneath you to support the prices of the enemies, your own enemies, at the expense of your population. What these leaders are doing, whether in Central Africa, Chad, Cameroon, Burkina Faso, Ethiopia, and all of that, they are allowing the interests of their enemies fighting one another and killing one another to support the prices of those that are above them. What matters here is who makes the decision. Who makes the decision is the West. We saw that. I mean, I asked myself here, please permit me to say this. Look at the example like Cameroon. How do you explain to me that a man of about 87 years old go and meet a boy of 35 years old, takes a plane without fear of plane crash, to go and explain to him his own plan that did not work in his own country? It's just to tell you that This world is controlled by systems, and our leaders understand. We understand that their hands are tied. I'm not encouraging any African or Cameroonian to go out on the street and fight their government. We need to stop this fighting, in-house fighting among ourselves, and understand that the real terrorists and the real enemies of this continent, these nations we are all talking about, they are those 5 members, especially UK, France, and the United States.
Shall we continue to look outside when in-house there are accomplices? In-house there are people who ought to stand up and say no. There are people who have been conferred the authority to take decisions, to take stands that will protect the people.
That is why I say that here we don't have democracy. There are no free and transparent elections in Africa. If the people were to go out and choose their own leaders, all these leaders we have in power will never see the light of power. And that is why I kept encouraging Africans that we must not discuss politics under political parties. We must not feel that the next president should come through another political party. You tell me how a man did not enter power from 60 to 84, whether it is a Central Africa, whether it is a Chad, did not enter through ballot box, and then encourages his own citizens that power is rotational. They put periods of election and call the public, the population to go out and vote. That is an abuse of human rights. When you know that no one can remove you there because you are not put there by the people that you are asking them to go and vote their leader. So these are the things that I'm saying, that there are so many factors that come here to play, that we need to get into an all-inclusive dialogue, which is very important. We have been so disorganized, no solidarity. I mean, it makes it in such a way that it's easy to use another African to kill another African because of the state in which we are living.
Africans have to rise up and unite in a common front against a common enemy. Ibako Adrien Bisson, thank you for coming.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, ladies and gentlemen, for staying with us. That's it for today. Equinoxe is up next.